The Sands Hotel was packed on the night of November 3rd, 1955. Dean Martin was 3 songs into his set, the audience eating out of his hand, when Anthony Big Tony Castiano walked in. Big Tony wasn't just any customer. He was a capo in the New York crime family with ties to every major casino in Vegas. He was loud, he was crude, and he was drunk, and he wanted everyone to know he was there. Dean was in the middle of a ballad when Big Tony's voice cut through the room. "Hey Dean, sing something with some life in it. My grandmother could put more energy into a song, and she's been dead for 10 years. The audience laughed nervously. Dean smiled, keeping his composure. "Well, sir, if your grandmother sings as well as you behave, I'd love to hear her sometime." More laughter, this time more comfortable. Dean had handled the heckler perfectly, acknowledged him, made a joke, moved on. He continued with his set, but Big Tony wasn't done. 20 minutes later, Dean was telling a story about growing up in Steubenville, Ohio, about his mother, Angela, and how she taught him to always be polite, always respect others, always conduct himself with dignity. It was a sweet story, one that humanized Dean and connected him to the audience. People were smiling, nodding along. That's when Big Tony stood up, his voice booming across the showroom. "Dean, your mother taught you manners. Shame she didn't teach you how Vegas really works." The room went silent. Every person there understood what had just happened. Big Tony hadn't just heckled, he'd insulted Dean's mother. In Italian culture, in any culture really, that was crossing a line. But especially for Dean, whose mother had died when he was young, whose memories of her were sacred. This was personal. The band stopped playing. The spotlight operator didn't know where to point the light. The audience held its breath, because everyone knew Dean Martin had 2 choices. He could ignore it and look weak, or he could respond and potentially start a war with a mobster who had the power to end his career in Vegas. Dean stood at the microphone perfectly still. He wasn't smiling anymore, but he wasn't angry either. His face was calm, contemplative. He took a slow breath, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but somehow reached every corner of the room. "Sir, I want to thank you for bringing up my mother," Dean said, "because she's actually the perfect example of what I'm trying to explain." Big Tony smirked, thinking he'd won. His crew laughed, but Dean wasn't done. "My mother came to this country from Italy when she was 17 years old." Dean continued. "She didn't speak English. She had no money. She had nothing except her character and her values. And you know what she taught me? She taught me that the way you treat people when you have power over them tells you everything about who you really are." The room was completely silent now. Dean's voice remained calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. "My mother cleaned houses for rich people," Dean said. "She scrubbed their floors, washed their clothes, cooked their meals, and some of those people treated her with respect. They said please and thank you. They saw her as a human being who was working hard to feed her family. But some of them," Dean paused, "some of them treated her like she was invisible, like she was nothing, like being poor and working with your hands meant you didn't deserve basic human dignity." Big Tony's smirk was fading. He could sense where this was going. "And you know what my mother told me?" Dean asked. "She said, I know. The people who are cruel when they have power are the weakest people in the world, because they need power to feel strong. They need to make others feel small so they can feel big." Dean's eyes were locked on Big Tony. "Now," she said, "real strength is being kind when you could be cruel. Real power is lifting people up, not tearing them down." The audience was transfixed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something deeper. "So when you make a joke about my mother," Dean said, his voice still calm, still measured, "you're actually proving exactly what she taught me. You're showing everyone in this room that you need to insult a dead woman to feel powerful. You need to mock someone's mother to get attention. And, sir, that doesn't make you look strong. That makes you look desperate." Big Tony's face was red now. His crew had stopped laughing. People at the surrounding tables were looking at him with expressions that ranged from pity to disgust. "Now, you said my mother should have taught me how Vegas really works," Dean continued. "Let me tell tell you how Vegas really works. Vegas runs on money. Sure, Vegas runs on power. Absolutely. But you know what makes Vegas actually function. It's the dealers and the waitresses and the janitors and the performers. It's the people who show up every day and do their jobs with dignity, even when people like you treat them like they're nothing. Dean took a step forward on the stage. My mother understood something that you clearly don't. Power without character is just bullying. Money without decency is just greed. And making jokes about someone's mother doesn't make you clever or funny or powerful. It makes you small. The silence in the room was absolute. Dean had just called out a mobster publicly, thoroughly, devastatingly, without raising his voice, without cursing, without threatening. He'd simply held up mirror and shown Big Tony exactly what he was. So here's what I'm going to do. Dean said, I'm going to continue with my show. I'm going to honor my mother's memory by treating everyone in this room, including you, with the respect and dignity she taught me, even when they don't deserve it, even when they've disrespected her, because that's what real strength looks like. That's what real class looks like. And that's how Vegas really works when you understand what actually matters. Dean turned to the band. Let's pick it up with something cheerful. How about that's Amore? The music started. Dean sang, and Big Tony sat there visibly shaken as the entire room watched him. He'd come into this showroom to assert his dominance, to remind everyone of his power, to put Dean Martin in his place. Instead, he'd been made to look like exactly what he was, a bully who needed to hurt others to feel important. After the show, Dean was in his dressing room when there was a knock on the door. It was one of Big Tony's associates, a man named Mr. Martin. Big Tony wants to speak with you. He's waiting outside. Dean's manager looked terrified. Dean, don't go. Let me call security. It's okay, Dean said calmly. I'll talk to him. Dean walked outside to the parking lot where Big Tony was leaning against a Cadillac, smoking a cigarette. His crew was there, but they kept their distance. Big Tony looked at Dean for a long moment, then spoke. You made me look like an in there. You made yourself look like an asshole. Dean replied evenly. I just pointed it. Big Tony took a drag on his cigarette. You know, I could make things very difficult for you in this town. I know, Dean said. You could probably end my career in Vegas. You could make sure I never work here again. You have that power. So why did you do it? Big Tony asked. Why risk everything to defend your dead mother's honor? Dean thought about it for a moment. Because some things are more important than a career. Some things are more important than money or success or staying safe. My mother gave everything so I could have opportunities she never had. The least I can do is defend her memory when someone disrespects it. Big Tony was quiet for a long time. My mother died when I was 12. He finally said she was a good woman, better than I turned out to be. He looked at Dean. What you said in there about how people treat others when they have power, my mother used to say something similar. I forgot about that. I forgot a lot of things she taught me. It's not too late to remember, Dean said quietly. Big Tony laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. Yeah, it is. I'm too far gone. I've done too many things. He flipped his cigarette away. But you're the real deal, Dean. You stood up there and spoke truth to me without being disrespectful. You defended your mother without attacking mine. You made me look small without humiliating me. He paused. That takes more guts than pulling a gun. That takes real strength. It's just who I am. Dean said. No. Big Tony corrected. It's who your mother raised you to be. And she did a hell of a job. He extended his hand. We're good? You and me. You won't have any trouble from me or my people in Vegas. You got my word on that. Dean shook his hand. Thanked you. And Dean, Big Tony added, what you said about real power being about lifting people up instead of tearing them down. I'm going to try to remember that. Can't promise I'll change who I am, but I'll remember. Big Tony and his crew left. Dean went back inside where his manager was pacing frantically. What happened? Are you okay? Did he threaten you? He apologized, Dean said simply. He, what? In his way, he apologized, and he said we wouldn't have any more trouble. Dean sat down suddenly exhausted. You know what's funny? I think he really heard what I said about his mother, about power, about how we treat people. I think somewhere under all that mob toughness, there's still a kid who remembers what his mother taught him about being decent. The story of that night spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. Not the version where Dean destroyed a mobster or got into a fight. The real version. The version scene where Dean Martin stood on stage and calmly, eloquently defended his mother's memory by explaining what real strength looked like, where he made a powerful, dangerous man look small, not through violence or threats, but through simple, devastating truth. Other entertainers heard the story and were inspired. If Dean Martin could stand up to a mobster without losing his cool, without sacrificing his values, maybe they could stand up to the bullies in their lives too. It became a defining moment, not just for Dean's career, but for how performers saw themselves in relation to the mob power structure that controlled Vegas. Years later, in 1965, Dean was doing an interview for a magazine. The interviewer asked him about the incident with Big Tony. Dean had never spoken about it publicly, but enough people knew the story that it had become legend. What made you respond the way you did? The interviewer asked. Most people would have either ignored it or gotten angry, but you did neither. Dean thought about it. When someone insults your mother, your first instinct is rage, right? You want to hurt them back. But then I remembered something my mother actually did teach me. She said, when someone tries to hurt you, ask yourself why. What pain are they in that makes them want to cause pain? And I realized Big Tony wasn't really trying to insult my mother. He was trying to assert dominance, to remind everyone of his power. The insult was just the tool he used. So you chose to address the tool rather than react to it? The interviewer said, exactly, Dean replied. I chose to talk about what my mother really taught me, what real power looks like, what real strength is. And in doing that, I showed everyone in that room, including Big Tony, that his way of asserting power was actually weakness. That true strength is being kind when you could be cruel. Do you think you changed his mind? The interviewer asked. Dean smiled. I don't know if I changed his mind, but I think I reminded him of something he used to know, something his own mother probably taught him, and maybe that reminder made a small difference. That's all we can really do, right? Remind people of the better versions of themselves. The interviewer noted this in his article. Dean Martin is often portrayed as the cool, detached member of the Rat Pack, but beneath that casual exterior is a man with unshakable principles, a deep respect for his roots, and the courage to speak truth even to dangerous men. His mother would be proud. When Dean Martin died in 1995, his daughter Diana found a small box among his possessions. Inside was a photograph of his mother, Angela, and a piece of paper with her handwriting. It was a note she'd written to him when he was young. Translated from Italian. Deno, always remember, being strong doesn't mean being hard. Being powerful doesn't mean being cruel. The strongest people are those who are kind when they could be mean, gentle when they could be harsh. That is true strength. That is what I want you to be. Dean had carried this note for his entire life. It had guided how he responded to Big Tony that night in 1955. It had shaped how he treated people throughout his career. It was his mother's final lesson, and he'd honored it every day. The story of the night a mafia boss made. A joke about Dean Martin's mother isn't really about the insult. It's about the response. It's about a man who could have reacted with anger, who could have escalated into violence, who could have let his ego drive his actions. But instead, he chose calm. He chose philosophy. He chose to speak truth rather than threats. And in doing so, he didn't just defend his mother's honor. He demonstrated exactly what she taught him. That true power isn't about dominating others. True power is about having the strength to remain calm, the wisdom to speak truth, and the courage to be kind even when cruelty would be easier. That's the lesson Angela Crocetti taught her son. And that November night in 1955, Dean Martin proved he'd learned it well. Big Tony Castellano died in 1972. According to people who knew him in his final years, he'd mellowed considerably. He was never a good man. He'd done too many terrible things for that. But he'd become less cruel, less needlessly vicious. When asked about it, he'd tell people, I heard something once that stuck with me about how treating people badly when you have power over them is just weakness. Pretending to be strength. Took me too long to understand it, but I understand it now. He never mentioned Dean Martin by name, but those who knew the story understood. One night in 1955, a singer stood on a stage and held up a mirror to a mobster. And somehow, against all odds, mobster actually looked into it and saw himself. That's not just courage. That's change. That's hope. That's the power of speaking truth with calm strength instead of angry violence. And that's why 70 years later, people still tell the story of the night Dean Martin responded to a mafia boss's insult with philosophy instead of fury, because it showed us all that there's a better way, that you don't have to meet cruelty with cruelty, that calm reasoned truth is more powerful than any threat, and that defending the people you love doesn't require violence. It requires only the courage to speak from the heart about what really matters. Dean Martin's mother taught him how Vegas really works, not the surface version where power and money rule everything, but the deeper truth that dignity, respect, and character matter more than any of it. And on that November night, in front of a packed showroom and one very dangerous man, Dean proved she was